Imagine living in fear, knowing that a killer disguised as a harmless clown prowled your streets. That was the reality for the residents of Cook County, Illinois, during the 1970s. A man who would stop at nothing to satisfy his twisted desires. His name was John Wayne Gacy, and he would become one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. In this video, we'll take you on a journey through the darkest corners of his mind, revealing the chilling truth behind his reign of terror. The man behind the mask. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents, John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson, were both of Irish descent. From a young age, Gacy showed signs of a troubled psyche, often acting out in violent ways. He was known to have a violent temper and would frequently get into fights with his classmates. Despite these early warning signs, Gacy managed to graduate from high school and enlist in the U.S. Army, where he served as a military policeman in Korea. It was during this time that Gacy began to develop a fascination with dressing up in women's clothing, a habit that would later become a key element in his crimes. The perfect facade. After his discharge from the Army, Gacy returned to Chicago and began working as a contractor. He quickly rose through the ranks and became a successful businessman, owning several restaurants and a construction company. On the surface, Gacy appeared to be a model citizen, respected by his community and loved by his family. However, beneath this perfect facade, a darker side was emerging. Gacy began to use his position of power to lure young men and boys into his home, where he would sexually assault and murder them. The descent into darkness. Hidden beneath Gacy's suburban home was a chamber of horrors unlike anything the world had seen before. The crawl space beneath his house served as a graveyard for his victims, young men who had fallen prey to his twisted fantasies. In 1972, Gacy's twisted desires manifested into his first known murder. He lured a young man to his home, strangled him, and buried him beneath his house. This became a horrific pattern. Gacy used his charm and various pretenses, like offering construction work, to lure young men. He would then overpower, torture, and sexually assault them before strangling them. The clown killer. Gacy's modus operandi was to dress up as a clown, a character he called Pogo, and invite young men and boys to his home for parties. Once they were there, he would drug them and then rape and strangle them. Gacy would then bury their bodies in the crawl space of his home, where he kept a collection of sex toys and other paraphernalia. Over 6 years, Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. For years, Gacy evaded suspicion, his double life carefully concealed from those around him. But as the body count rose, so too did the urgency to unmask the killer hiding in plain sight. With each disappearance, the pressure mounted on law enforcement to bring Gacy to justice. Despite his attempts to evade capture, the net began to close around him as investigators pieced together the clues that would lead to his downfall. But even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Gacy remained defiant, maintaining his innocence until the bitter end. It would take a relentless pursuit of justice to finally put an end to his reign of terror. Justice served, but the scars remain. Gacy's trial became a media spectacle, captivating the nation with its gruesome details. In December 1978, a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest disappeared after visiting Gacy's home. His disappearance sparked a massive search, and police soon discovered the bodies of 2 other young men buried in Gacy's crawl space. Gacy was arrested and charged with their murders. During his trial, Gacy claimed that he was possessed by the spirit of his deceased father and that he had no memory of the murders. Despite this, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Gacy spent the next 14 years on death row. About 3 a.m., word came. John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer who prowled Chicago streets preying on lonely runaways and murdered 33 young men and boys, had been executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. His crimes left a lasting scar on the community and continue to serve as a chilling reminder of the monsters that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. So what was his motive behind the murders? There's no single universally agreed-upon definition of serial murder. Originally, the FBI defined it as needing at least 4 killings, but this was lowered to 3 and has faced criticism for excluding some cases. Now, many experts use the National Institute of Justice's definition, which requires at least 2 murders happening over time, from hours to years. Serial murders can be broadly categorized into 2 types. Classic involves stalking and is often driven by sexual motives. Spree, driven by the thrill of the act itself, not necessarily sexual in nature. Unlike political assassinations or gang killings, most serial murders lack a clear financial or strategic reason. Instead, they are believed to be driven by psychological factors like sexual compulsion. The act of killing provides a sense of sexual gratification, power. The murderer seeks to exert control over their victims. Dr. Helen Morrison, a forensic psychiatrist, had interviewed serial killer John Wayne Gacy for years. After Gacy's execution, she arranged for an examination of his brain to see if there were any abnormalities that could explain his behavior. The examination found nothing unusual. Morrison summed up Gacy's brain in one very simple phrase. "A normal brain," she said. John Wayne Gacy's motive behind his gruesome murders remains a subject of speculation and analysis. Despite the lack of a clear motive provided by Gacy himself, various theories have emerged to explain his actions. Gacy's childhood experiences, marked by an abusive father and a difficult relationship with his mother, have been suggested as contributing factors to his later criminal behavior. Some experts believe that Gacy's troubled upbringing and unresolved psychological issues may have played a role in his descent into violence and depravity. Additionally, Gacy's crimes were characterized by a pattern of sexual assault and murder, indicating a possible motive rooted in sexual compulsion or deviant desires. His modus operandi of luring young men and boys to his home under false pretenses, then subjecting them to horrific acts of violence, points to a twisted form of gratification derived from domination and control. While Gacy himself claimed there was no specific motive for his murders, the repetitive nature of his crimes and the sheer number of victims suggest a deep-seated pathology that drove him to commit these heinous acts. The jury's rejection of the insanity defense during his trial further underscores the deliberate and calculated nature of Gacy's crimes, indicating a level of premeditation that belies any notion of random or impulsive behavior. Helen Morrison still has John Wayne Gacy's brain, although she won't say exactly where she keeps it. She stores it in a plastic bag and hopes that one day DNA or other scientific advances may lead to new tests. The question of why people do such terrible, inhuman things is as intriguing to her as it was when she first began asking it. "Is there an answer?" "Not yet," she said. "There is no answer at all. I think that's what keeps me going, that search for anything that could make this less of a mystery."